Okay, good day, class. This is our third session in total. This is our third session for forensic chemistry. And today, this video will tackle about witnesses and we'll talk about drug analysis or forensic drug analysis and the drug examination procedures as well. Okay, so my discussion today will be based from your ebook. I will first start with chapter 5, which is witnesses or yung witness, especially for expert witnesses. Okay, so let me just change the presentation. Okay, so it is in your ebook, chapter 5 of your ebook, Witnesses. So we'll go on to our lesson objectives. So first, we will be able to enumerate and explain the qualifications of an ordinary compared to an expert witness. We will be able to appreciate the importance of the roles of an ordinary and expert witness, especially in the solution and, of course, solving crimes. And, of course, we will be able to identify what are the qualifications for an expert witness and, of course, witness in general. Okay, so let's first define what is a witness under our laws. Okay, so first, a witness is defined to have the following qualifications. This is in general, okay? Yung general qualification of a witness. First, of course, you must have the capability to perceive, of course, using vital organs, vital senses of the body, and of course, to make known of those perceptions. Okay? So, hindi ibig sabihin na pwede ka nang maging witness if nakakaramdam ka, nakakarinig ka, nakakatikim ka, nakakaramdam ka or nakakahawak ka, or nakakakita ka. It is very important for a witness to make known of his perception. Ibig sabihin, kailangan yung witness makommunicate niya in any means or ways yung kanyang mga nakita, nahawakan, naamoy, yung kanyang mga nalalaman with regards to the subject matter. Okay? Yan. That is for number 2. Be able to perceive and of course, make known of that perception to others. Of course, yung others na yan, of course, refers to the court or those people who will be questioning or will be conducting cross-examinations and re-examinations during court proceedings. And of course, next one is, para ikaw ay isang maging witness, you must have not fallen into any of the exceptions provided by law under the rules of court. Yan. With the admissibility of witnesses. Okay? So, in general, yung witness, yan yung mga individuals that have important jobs to do with regards to the case at hand. For example, ang mga victims, they are considered witnesses in fact in favor of the prosecution. Or in other cases, meron ding mga witnesses ang defense counsel. Ayan. So the opinion of a witness regarding a question of science, art, or trade where he is skilled therein may be received in evidence. Ibig sabihin, kung ang witness may certain expertise in the field of science, art, or trade, or any expertise na kung saan siya ay may enough skills and of course enough proof for that skills, at of course qualified siya na to make known of his perceptions, then of course yung kanyang mga skills, yung kanyang knowledge with regards to a certain field which is in question in that case could be received in evidence together with him that is considered an expert witness. Okay? So yung testimonies niya with regards to his expertise or yung skills niya with his expertise, of course, matatanggap as basis of expert witness. Okay? Yan. So yan yung expert witness. Next, we have the distinctions between an ordinary and an expert witness. Okay? We have there a comparison table. So first, ordinary witness. Okay? Sa regular na mga witnesses, commonly mga victims, they can only state kung ano yung mga na-perceive niya with the use of any of his senses or all of his senses. Well, sa expert witness, they could state what they have perceived and also give their expert opinion, which is basically yung kanilang mga presumptions, mga deductions or conclusions nila sa kanilang field of expertise based on their perception and based and logically concluded in accordance to the scientific methods used. Ang ordinary witness cannot be skilled into something, cannot be skilled on the matter he or she is testifying. While an expert witness, by virtue of his knowledge, his skills, of course, yung experience, of course, expert witness, kailangan expert ka. Skilled in the trade, science, or art na kung saan yun yung tinetestify mo. For example, mga doctors. Sabihin natin ang doctor na yan is a medical doctor. So, of course, once he will be called upon to testify on the basis of a siguro medical fact in relation to a case, then of course, yung kanyang mga deductions, yung kanyang mga statements or testimonies in relation to his job or in the performance of his duty as a doctor or a physician, that will be called an expert testimony done by an expert witness. An ordinary witness cannot testify on things or facts he has not perceived except those provided by law or those that are included in the exceptions. While sa expert witness naman, pwede siya mag-testify sa mga bagay na hindi naman niya nakita directly. But he could give opinions or deductions or conclusions that has a logical connection with regards to the offense committed or yung sa isang circumstance or on the basis of the facts in relation to the field of science, art, or trade na kung saan siya may expertise. So basically, those expert witnesses, they're most probably than not experts in their field, commonly sa forensic science or science in general. Let's proceed to the probative value of an expert testimony. Yan. According sa Supreme Court reports annotated, kay Paras versus Narciso at kay Dolor versus Jansin, whether courts are or are not bound by the testimony of an expert depends upon the nature of the subject or inquiry. Ibig sabihin, kung ang subject ng inquiry is of general knowledge ng mga tao, of course, including the judge, then of course, hindi na kinakailangan ng conclusions ng expert dahil of public general knowledge na. Ibig sabihin, ang tawag dyan is judicial knowledge. Yan, ibig sabihin, lahat ng tao, alam yan. For example, alam natin na Philippines is part of Asia. It's general knowledge. Common knowledge, ika nga. For example, kung ang subject ng isang circumstance or inquiry with relation to a case is the genuineness of a handwriting compared to a standard o yung parang original comparison na writing. Yan. So there's a probative value na, of course, yung mismong handwriting ang magiging topic. And of course, expert testimony is not really the main point or yung kinakailangang testimony. Pwede na mismo yung mga nakakita mismo ng pagpirma ng document or the writer himself or herself. But if the subject of inquiry in a case during court proceedings, kung ang subject niyan ng isang circumstance is of a nature na kung saan no ordinary person or sabihin natin kakaunti lang ang may alam or may expertise. For example, determination ng DNA. Then of course, the court would not call it a judicial knowledge. Hindi siya general knowledge. Yung mga experts, yung mga duly registered and licensed individuals in relation to that subject matter, and for that example, in the field of science, forensic science, in fact, sila at yung kanilang mga opinions, mga conclusions nila, that is an expert testimony done by an expert witness on the basis and the reason na yung topic or yung subject matter is not of common knowledge. So next, nakikita nyo dyan, qualifications of an expert witness. Again, this is based upon the rules of evidence in relation to the rules of court dito sa atin. So first, for an expert witness to be qualified, of course, kinakailangan ma-state or malaman or maipalam sa korte ang degree of learning ng witness or kung ano mang natapos niya, anong expertise niya, kung ano yung experience niya. And if merong proof with regards to the learning of witness or yung degree of learning niya. So of course, hindi lang pwede sabihin na, abogado yan or doktor yan. There must always be evidence to prove the degree of learning ng expert witness. Sunod, yung pwede lang i-testify or yung contents ng testimony ng isang expert witness should only be limited on the basis and logic of his conclusion in relation to his subject field o yung kanyang expertise. For example, forensic chemist nag-testify sa korte. Of course, expert witness. Qualified naman siya, meron siyang proof to support that he is really a forensic chemist. Of course, merong report na present that's part of a documentary evidence. Yung pwede nilang i-testify sa korte or sabihin sa korte are those that are related scientifically to the processes involved with forensic chemistry. Hindi pwede niyang sabihin na, dahil dito sa report na ito, siya ang suspect or siya yung pumatay. That will not be accepted in court and that is not a proper testimony. Ang pwede nilang sabihin is yung proof at resulta ng test. For example, Your Honor, ang resulta na nakalagay dito points out that the blood stains in fact found on a crime scene originated from a human being. Hindi niya pinopoint out sino or hindi niya pinopoint out yung suspect because if the expert witness will really point to the suspect, then that will be called a leading testimony. Hindi yan pwede. So, could only be limited to the results and deductions or conclusions on the report. Of course, within the expertise of a witness. Kasi of course, ang judges, ang mga tao, or even lawyers, don't really have that expertise on most fields. Di ba? Anong alam ng lawyer sa aerodynamics. Anong alam ng judge sa paggawa or pag-manufacture ng mga bagay? Anong alam ng mga law enforcers or ng prosecutor sa mga nangyayari within a motor vehicle? Ano yung mechanisms ng makina, 'di ba? So of course you need an expert on that. And those experts are only limited sa kanilang testimonies on the basis and logic of their conclusions and the other proof of the case. Okay? So I've discussed about the qualifications of an expert witness. Yan. So next, I will be presenting to you the next topic, which is about drugs. Yan. Because this is part of your first exam, of course, you need to understand the concept of drugs, specifically illegal drugs. Ayan. Chapter 6 ng ebook ninyo. That is on page 37. So, lesson objectives muna natin. First, distinguish different types of drugs according to their classification. You will be able to state the undesirable effects of dangerous drugs to the person taking it. We will be able to group different types of drugs according to their respective classification also. Okay? Kasi meron yung mga classifications and sub-classifications of drugs. Okay? So please take note of the following. Okay? First, let's define those mga basic and needed terms with regards to this. First, let's define what is a drug. So, a drug is a chemical substance that brings about physical, physiological, behavioral, and or psychological change in a person taking it. Okay? Maraming paraan sa pag-intake ng isang drug. And of course, drugs brings physical, psychological, behavioral, or physiological change sa taong nag-i-intake niyan. Pero just to clear the air for you, hindi ibig sabihin na lahat ng droga ay masama. Lahat ng droga medisina. All medicines are drugs. Lahat ng mga medisinang binibenta or hindi, they're drugs. Classified as drugs in general, but not all drugs are medicines or medicinal drug. Di lahat ng droga nakaka-cure or nag-a-alleviate or nagbabawas ng tension or sakit sa katawan. Because there are drugs that are dangerous for the body, especially when taken without consent or taken abusively. Medicinal drugs, these are substances which, when taken into the human body, cures illness and or relieves symptoms of disease. Okay? Medicinal in nature to cure illnesses of the body or would relieve those symptoms of sickness or relieve pain from the body. Medicinal drugs. Pwede organic or natural, pwede rin synthetic or man-made. Next, of course, dangerous drugs. These are substances affecting the central nervous system primarily. Yan. Behavior changes, of course, in relation to your brain. Psychiatric tendencies, mag-iiba. So these dangerous drugs, when taken into the human body, of course, just like regular drugs, brings physical, emotional, or behavioral changes. Okay? Pero sa dangerous drugs, unang tinitira nito, the central nervous system. Nerves reaching to the brain, yung spine or yung spinal cord. Yan. And other sensory motor functions of the body na, of course, may mga stimuli na tinatanggap at binabalik papunta sa brain. When we say drug abuse, okay? Pag sinabing drug abuse, ito yung pagtitake ng mga drugs na of course, when you take drugs, there are physical, there will be psychological effects. Pero when you are taking drugs non-medically or the non-medical use of drugs, ibig sabihin, tinitake mo yung drugs against the prescription of a doctor or without a prescription of the doctor, or you are taking drugs that are not allowed to be taken, same as medicinal drugs. So of course, when taking these kind of drugs abusively, sabi natin too much, nagtitake kayo ng drugs na hindi naman na-prescribe sa inyo, or you're taking drugs that not they are not really medicinal drugs for human consumption, then it would cause physical, psychological changes, obviously, economic changes, magasto kaya. Social damage, it would affect your social skills, primarily your psychological skills ang tirintiran yan bago magkakaroon ng epekto sa socialization. And of course, legal damages. Of course, by virtue of our law, yung Dangerous Drugs Act of 2002, RA 9165, of course, may mga drugs na pinoprohibit gamitin. And of course, kahit sa doktor naman, may mga drugs na strict yung pagsunod ng prescription. Yan. And of course, it would affect the human body in general. When we say abuse naman, of course, in relation to illegal drugs, that's basically the tendency of individuals to indulge in drugs that are not allowed or prohibited by law, or those who indulge into drugs that are not prescribed by doctors and would cause damage to the body. Damage to the body. And those drugs also that are not available legally. Yan. Kung ikaw naman binigyan ng prescription ng doctor, of course, you would take it following the doctor's medications. Kung magtitake ka naman ng tinatawag na over-the-counter medications, yung mga drugs na hindi kinakailangan ng prescription, well, still okay. Hindi naman yan pinoprohibit. But when you take or indulge yourselves into drugs that are not part of those legally allowed or those that are prohibited by law at ginagamit mo yan extensively, well, that is drug abuse. Let's proceed to classification of drugs, okay? We would classify them first according to origin. Okay? So, meron tayong dalawang classification of drugs, again, according to origin. Okay? Tandaan, dalawa lang ang classification according to origin. We have natural drugs and synthetic drugs. So, when we say natural drugs, sinabi ko na yan, ito sila organic. Okay? Mga plant-based ito. These type of drugs are either mainly yung ginagamit talaga na mga natural herbs, or these natural drugs are ingredients of synthetic drugs. Whether those synthetic drugs are for purposes na controlled or yung purposes na uncontrolled or illegal. These are active ingredients, secondary metabolic products of plants and other living systems na pwede silang magamit for human consumption by means of extracting or separating them from the plant itself. For example, marijuana. Yan. Mary Jane. Yan. Happy for 20. Of course, yung coca bush. Yung coca bush na plant. And of course, yung raw opium. Highly addictive natural drug. Yan. Organic in general. Mga herbs, five fingers ba yan? Or kung ano ba yung mga ginagamit nilang terms dyan. Next, we have synthetic drugs. Okay, these drugs are man-made, artificially produced, done in laboratories. Okay, keyword natin dyan is synthesized. Ibig sabihin, may human intervention, of course, with the help of chemicals, with the help of human mechanisms. Okay, so synthetic drugs, artificially produced substances done in the laboratory, which are commonly done and produced for the black world. Ibig sabihin, yung mga underworld, mga illicit markets or black markets, yan. Mostly nitong mga synthetic na illegal drugs, they are done inside clandestine laboratories or yung mga laboratories na patagong ino-operate. Okay? Either they are wholly manufactured from chemicals o yung chemicals lahat yung content niya or yung raw material or itong mga synthetic drugs na may halong konting natural sources. For example, meth or methamphetamine. Kung gusto mo shabu, methamphetamine hydrochloride. Of course, another sleeping drug, barbiturates. It's like having a sleeping pill pero tulog na tulog ka. Yan. It has been a cause of death for many already. Aside from the classification according to origin, meron tayong classification according sa ating legal structure. Okay? Dito sa Pilipinas. Okay? So in RA 9165 or the Comprehensive Dangerous Drugs Act of 2002, may classification dyan na kung saan drugs are classified depending on their effects to the body, yan, which will be discussed on the next moments. We also have a classification of drugs that are considered volatile substances under Presidential Decree 1619, yung law against volatile substances and the control of it. And of course, Republic Act 6425. Okay? So, dito, itong RA 6425 is the predecessor or yung Old Dangerous Drugs Act of 1972. Tapos binago yan siya noong 2002 by virtue of RA 9165. So, under RA 9165, merong refined at makabagong prohibition and regulation changes for dangerous drugs kung saan meron silang intermediate at makabagong mga classifications legally. Okay? So first, we have those immediate precursors. These are chemical substances used in clandestine manufacturing processes. Na kung saan, itong mga precursors, ito yung mga ingredients. Okay? Ingredients na kanang murag chip in, and once na mag-mix na yan sila, then you have the final illegal drug product. Okay? Becomes incorporated in full or in part into the final molecules of a substance under international control. Itong immediate precursors, kinokontrol ang content nito, kinokontrol ang distribution nito ng bawat gobyerno. It is under the United Nations Convention on Organized Crime and Dangerous Drugs. Next, we have essential chemicals. Of course, essential, importanteng mga chemical substances to na ginagamit either as reagent or solvent sa manufacturing ng illegal drugs or controlled substances. Third classification, yung mga narcotics, psychotropics, and mga designer drugs. Okay? Designer drugs, they are basically not branded drugs, but they mimic the effects of those legal drugs. Kino-consider silang illegal itong mga designer drugs dahil walang copyright, walang patent, or may other side effects itong mga drogang to, which is of course prohibited. We also have the UN International Classification of Drugs. Okay? We have the narcotics substances, psychotropic substances, and designer drugs. Okay? We also have those classification of drugs according to the pharmacological classification or yung classification based on effects. Okay? First, we have stimulants, we have hallucinogens, depressants, and inhalants. Okay? Isa-isahin natin to sila. Okay? There are samples of this. So first, stimulants. Ano tong mga stimulants? Okay? From the word stimulate, it increases alertness. Okay? Again, it increases alertness ng katawan. For example, amphetamine. Gusto mong dagdagan yung level ng pagiging alert, then it will be soon after maging methamphetamine hydrochloride or yung shabu. But back to amphetamine, okay? For example, ang tawag nito mga pep drugs or pep pills or mga poppers, okay? So, itong amphetamine, ang reason bakit siya stimulant because it would make you have less sleep, increased alertness or initiative. Ibig sabihin, hindi ka talaga makakatulog nito. That's why other individuals, siguro, ayaw na nila sa kape, di ba? They will try stimulants such as amphetamines to keep them awake by virtue of their work or yung nature ng kanilang lifestyle. So of course, effects ng stimulants, of course, it will not just make you feel awake for multiple days. Of course, dahil gising na gising ka, you think you have power, you're strong, it would reduce your appetite and it would somehow, para sa iba, mawala daw yung mental depression. But originally, it would really create fatigue on your body. It doesn't comfort fatigue. Of course, mawawala yung sleepiness. But again, it will destroy your vitality. How is it taken? Napakarami. Either they would really do it orally, lunokon nila, or it will be on a tablet um, delivery or administration method or via a capsule. Okay? So, stimulants, it's really abused by many. Yan. Maraming nagdedepende dito. You have drug dependence on this. Some people would really get killed because of overdosage. Sumobra sa dosage na dapat ma-intake lang for one ingestion. And of course, yung dangers nito na kinatatakutan talaga. Violent and bizarre behavior ng user. Yan. Really, they think they have power. Yan. So, example ng mga stimulants, of course, we have shabu, methamphetamine hydrochloride, poor man's cocaine, ika nga, or ice. Di ba? Palitsyag ice, abinimog ice na tagdos. Pero tong ice na tig, 1,750. Di ba? Mahal ng shabu ngayon. Especially for places na mahirap pasok. Okay? But that is poor man's cocaine. Cocaine kasi is a higher level of course, higher priced na methamphetamine. So, ano yung shabu? Shabu or methamphetamine hydrochloride is a white, odorless crystal or could be in a crystalline powder. Mura nagtawas. Pero naay mga shabu na pino kaayo pero shiny, same as kanang tawas. And if you have used it, of course, it has a bitter, numbing taste. Na. Ang uban na, especially with cocaine sa US, they would inhale it, 'di ba? Hit-hito na nila. Or they would chase the dragon, 'di ba? Ang uban in other countries, they would like to chase the sun. Ibig sabihin, they would take cocaine and inhale it or sniff it. Yung iba naman na ayaw ng ganyan kasi baka gusto nila ma-maintain yung smell nila, intravenously or i-inject nila. Magpa-vaccine sila og cocaine. Some others, of course, they would smoke it using, sabihin natin, joint, 'di ba? Of course, you have foils there, 'di ba? Parang gagawin nilang sigarilyo or makeshift na sigarilyo. Or yung iba na gusto talaga parang medicine, gagawa ng tableta at of course, ilulunok. Yan. Anong epekto ng shabu? Of course, just like stimulants, it would somehow lessen their time to sleep, of course, dahil magiging stimulated ang katawan. It would increase heartbeat, of course, create hypertension, convulsion pag sumobra na, and even death. Yan. Akala nila mawawalang problema niya pero ginagawa nila ng problema ang sarili nilang katawan. For others who really wanted to have a trip that is not like others, of course, they would inject liquefied or even yung synthetic na mga cocaine or shabu. And the thing is, they don't really want to use other types of syringe or yung injection. So, may instances talaga na magkakahawa-hawa sila sa kanilang trip dahil pinag-share nila sa ibang tao yung needle na tinuturok nila. Can lead to infections or even acquiring of other diseases. Okay, that's an example of a stimulant. Next, we have hallucinogens. These are drugs which affect sensation, thinking, self-awareness, and emotion. From the word hallucinate, ibig sabihin, nag-e-exaggerate yung emotions mo, yung nakikita mo at nararamdaman mo. Yan. There are changes in the time and space perception ng mga high nito. Okay? Delusions or false beliefs ang keyword, okay? False beliefs. Yung naniniwala sila sa isang bagay na hindi naman existing. Okay? They're hallucinating. Yan. Either they're overwhelmed or they're very sad or they believe in something that does not really exist. Yan ang hallucinogens. Yan ang paghahallucinate. Best example niya na ginagamit mostly ng buong mundo, ecstasy. Yan. So, also known as Mr. E. Okay? Or essence. Yan. Ecstasy, pwede yan siyang via tablet. Okay? Parang medicine lang, de tableta or capsule. Or they would inhale it kung gas figure yan siya or gas na property ng ecstasy. Really, it would make you dilate your pupils, pwede kang sumobra ng heartbeat or increased heartbeat, make it irregular, maninigas ang mga legs at jaws, pati arms mo, you would have excessive sweating and of course, sakit ng ulo. Once it is taken really too much or yung dosage na meron sa isang content is really too much for the body to handle, it could kill you in minutes. Yan. Yung iba hours, of course. It could really kill itong ecstasy. Ginagamit tong ecstasy not just to really make you feel something na powerful ka. It is used primarily for the use of sex. Okay? Ecstasy just to increase sex performance, ika nga, ng mga nagpa-parties, especially rave parties. At depende rin sa dose, pwede mild, pwede regular, or pwede yung tinatawag nilang parang overwhelming na talaga or shall I say parang flaka. Okay? Yung mga mild hallucinogens, of course, meron daw silang nakikita na Hindi naman talaga nandyan. Yan. So, examples of this hallucinogen, aside from ecstasy, we also have LSD. This is starting to be a prevalent dangerous drug that is being used by people who, of course, use this. Lysergic acid diethylamide or yung tinatawag nilang Lucy in the Sky. Yan, Lucy in the Sky o yung brain eaters because it would really make your brain shrink. Literally, ito yung sinasabi talaga. Ito yung sinasabi ng presidente na dangerous drugs that would make your brain shrink the more you use it. Yan. Of course, LSD, lysergic acid diethylamide. Okay, so this is a synthetic dangerous drug, of course, alkaloid in nature, na kung saan ang main ingredient nito is yung fungus coming from other grains such as wheat or rye. Yan. So, anong epekto ng LSD? Basically, cocaine and ecstasy times 10 or 100. Yan. Vivid hallucinations, confusion, blurring of vision, and of course, consciousness, extreme consciousness and unconsciousness. Yan. Anong mangyayari physically? Yan. Dilated pupils, flushed face, and of course, increased blood pressure and heartbeat. Much higher than ecstasy. Yan. So, anong epekto nito sa katawan? Especially the blood. So, ang mangyayari nito, yung white blood cells ang unang aatakihin nito. It will break those white blood cells na kinakailangan ng dugo. White blood cells carry genes, which is, of course, nasa atin. It carries those genes in our blood. Na kung saan kung babae ang gumagamit ng LSD, most probably than not, kung user talaga sila, their children would really have birth defects. Of course, think you know this. So, of course, napakaraming tawag niyan. But the origin of Mary Jane, o yung dope, o yung joint, o yung damo na tinatawag, comes from the Indian hemp plant, also known as cannabis sativa lima linnaeus. Cannabis sativa linnaeus ang tama niyan. This Indian hemp plant was studied and of course discovered primarily by a researcher, a scientist na si Charles Linnaeus. Kaya yung L sa kanya, Cannabis sativa linnaeus. Yan. So I think you already know what's this. 5 fingers, green tobacco. Nung mga panahon, ancient period, when this was originally discovered, they intend to use this same as yung mga tabako. They would smoke this on pipes. Yan. They would even use this as a combination with food. Yan. Parang candy. Yung iba, hinihit-hit na talaga once this creates smoke. Okay? Yung iba, dinidikdik, pinapowder. And then they would mix anything from milk, honey, and butter. Yan. Pero ngayon, this is already cultivated by others, or by some, which is illegal, and then they would use it or distribute it. Yan. Again, illegal. Hindi pwedeng advance mag-isip. Hindi pa nga ginagawang legal, ginagawa mo ng legal. Kahit bawal pa. So, hindi yun advance mag-isip. So, immediate effects of marijuana use, of course, just like others, it would really increase your heartbeat in an irregular manner. Of course, bloodshot eyes and dry mouth. Palaging humihit-hit. Palaging naninigarilyo nito. Of course, bloodshot eyes. It would really increase awakeness. Na, kung experience na talaga, veteran na talaga, of course, chest pain would start to be very painful, of course. Temporary loss of fertility, of course. Mababao, especially male users of this. Soon after, it would cause cancer. Depende kung asan talaga tinitira within the body. And of course, burnout. Yan. What are the dangers of the use of marijuana? Of course, yung body coordination and mental capability. Hihina talaga. Di ba? 1 plus 1 equals ganja. Di ba? Ganyan. 1 plus 1 equals 420. Yung parang ganun. Yan. Of course, most of those long-time users of this would depend on these drugs like it's their life. So, of course, may psychological dependence. Okay? So, that is for marijuana. Asan nga napabilang ang marijuana? That is part ng mga tinatawag na hallucinogens. Kasi common characteristic nitong mga hallucinogens, meron talagang hallucinations. Diba? For example, nagtitake ng marijuana or sabihin natin LSD. Tatalon yan sila, aakalain nilang mga players sila ng PUBG. Na pagtatalon sila may parachute. Well, in fact, tumalon lang sila. Walang parachute. They would think that they have something or see something which in reality is not even there. Okay? Next, after hallucinogens, let's skip it down to itong depressants. Okay, this is the exact opposite of stimulants kung saan itong depressants, una talagang tinitira nito, the central nervous system. Okay? And meron ding subclassifications ng depressants which of course ang main na mangyayari sa katawan, of course from the word depressed, yan, it would lower the functions of the body. Unang tinitira, again, the central nervous system. So with the types of depressants, we'll go first with narcotics, okay? Take note, narcotics induces sleep or stupor or ginagamit to relieve pain, okay? Yung mga painkillers na ginagamit legally, like for example, yung mga biogesic ba yan? Ang tawag dyan sa kanila, mga analgesics, painkillers. Yan din ang narcotics, pero it would induce sleep. Yan. Hypnotics, yan, or sleep science, kumbaga, or stupor. Yan. Itong mga narcotics, like for example, heroin, morphine, yung mga derivatives ng opium, yan, kasi originally opium yan, tapos naging heroin, morphine, codeine, yan. Itong mga narcotics, of course, nire-relax nito yung katawan. Yan. But, of course, when you use this too much or on a daily basis, it might cause even death. Yan. Next, after narcotics, we have tranquilizers, a substance that reduces anxiety. Itong mga depressants, in general, ginagamit to sila ng mga users because it reduces anxiety or nalilimutan nila yung problema nila, marerelax ang kanilang paligid, to ease tension, or to relax muscles, ika nga. So, tranquilizers, of course, yung pamparelax. Yan. More like yung mga ginagamit ng mga legal tranquilizers, ginagamit sa medicinal field, meron din mga tranquilizers na prohibited. Okay? All of those to release tension, yan, or in general, itong depressants, to sedate the body and the feeling of the person. Kaya of course, kasama yung mga sedatives at hypnotics, which would calm the nerves, ease tension, would induce sleep, and of course, it would normalize blood flow. Yan. Pero there will be a point na sa sobrang sedated, hindi na makakagising yung tao. Of course, alcohol is a depressant. Oldest known depressant, first known depressant. Okay? Next, we have inhalants. Of course, from the word inhalation, yan. Of course, with the use of your nose, with the use of your nose, you would of course inhale the properties of these toxic chemicals. Of course, they have psychoactive effects with their vapors or fumes nila or yung amoy nila, which of course would first hit yung sense of sight and of course the brain. Yan. Of course, ang lungs din apektado, but it would really lessen the functioning of the brain. Yung mga neurons na tinatawag dyan, of course, yung stimuli at yung mga stimulus na nagta-travel, of course, hindi bibilis. It would really lower the level of alertness. And for example, humihit-hit kayo ng Elmer's, di ba? Or ginagamit yung gasolina hindi para sa mga machines. Hinihit-hit nyo. Di ba? Or sige ra magsinghot og thinner or naphthalene or solvent. Yan, solvent. Basically, yung bulka, yan, inhalants yan. They are called volatile substances because they're basically toxic in relation sa kanilang vapors or fumes or yung amoy nila. Okay? So we have stimulants, we have hallucinogens, we have depressants, we have inhalants. Yan. So what are dangerous drugs? Yan. So dangerous drug is a substance affecting the central nervous system which is taken into the human body and brings about physical, emotional, or behavioral changes sa taong gumagamit. Yan. Mood altering, perception altering substances. Of course, to change feelings, behavior, and body function. Yan. So, in the Old Dangerous Drugs Act, of course, prohibited, regulated, at volatile substances lang yung legal classification ng drugs sa ating bansa. Yan, prohibited lang yan noon, regulated lang yan noon, volatile substances lang yan noon. Yan, prohibited drug, of course, yung mga pinagbabawal. Yan, opium and its components and derivatives. Yan. Appeal na dira ang cocaine, of course, you still have marijuana and such. Next, of course, aside from prohibited drug, meron din yung mga regulated drug o yung mga ina-allow in controlled contents. Yan. Such as sedatives, phenobarbital, pentobarbitals, amorbarbitals, benzedrine, and yung mga nitrazepam. Yan. Basically, hypnotic drugs yan noon. And of course, volatile substances. Kasi, hindi naman sila drugs ang purpose nito. Basically, substances na toxic ito na ginagamit for other purposes. Of course. Generally, itong mga volatile substances, hinihit-hit, sniffed, of course, smelled yan, inhaled, and then introduced into the body. Ayan. With regards to RA 9165 or yung Comprehensive Dangerous Drugs Act of 2002, yung prohibited at regulated drug, of course, mas binigyang diin yung terms na yon. Yan. For prohibited drugs, dangerous drugs. For regulated drugs, merong regulated drugs na dangerous din. Yan. What about drug dependence? Anong ibig sabihin yan? When we say drug dependence, yan, refers to a state of psychic or physical dependence. Or both. Nandyan sa'yo. Kumbaga, ikaw, yung user, nagde-depende na yung paggamit mo o yung daily life mo nagde-depende na sa droga. Drug abuse, of course, ginagamit mo yung droga in excessive or in contents na hindi prescribed. Drug dependence, you basically depend on it and do it continuously. So, drug dependency, of course, meron tayong mga characteristics niyan. First, we have physical dependence. Of course, basically physical dependency of the drug. Yan. Kumbaga yung katawan mo yung nangangailangan at naghahanap niyon. Mental or psychological dependence. This is the need of drug in order to feel good or to return to normal. Yung nasa isip mo or yung nasa mentality mo na kinakailangan mo. And of course, with all drug dependencies, there will be idiosyncrasies. Yan. Idiosyncrasy, simply side effects. Especially when you withdrew something, like for example, bigla kayong tumigil, or biglang nawala yung supply. 'Di ba? Illegal drugs, biglang nawala yung supply. Anong mangyayari sa mga users? Obviously, they will have idiosyncrasies that for normal people and even for medical professionals, they will take a look at it severely, yung mga idiosyncrasies or side effects. When we say use or use of drugs, ito yung administration of drugs. Whether you inject it either intravenously or on the veins, or you just inject it muscularly or sa skin, or when you consume it by chewing, smoking, eating, swallowing, or drinking it, yan, or introducing it in general sa physiological system ng katawan. Of course, that is referred to as use or administration. For selling, of course, giving of dangerous drug with or without consideration, as long as you give it or you transfer the drug itself, that's selling. Okay, so we'll proceed to the next chapter, which is the examination of dangerous drugs. So, lesson objectives tayo first. We would be able to state the different methods of examination ng mga dangerous drugs after this discussion. And somehow you'll be able to identify the specific methods of examination for a specific type of drug. Okay? Also, we'll be able to enumerate the different ways of tampering these kind of examinations, especially sa urine examination. And hopefully you will show enthusiasm in recognizing, the positive result of each drug examination method. And we will be able to identify the different types of drugs and their groups regarding to their proper classification. So first, let's define drug identification. So drug identification, it is a part of forensic chemistry that deals with the scientific examination of drugs, including volatile substances. Yan. So, of course, ang gumagawa niyan is a forensic chemist or yung chemical officer in other agencies. So, the purpose of drug identification is para ma-determine kung may presence ba talaga ng dangerous drug on those specimens submitted. Pwede by blood, by urine, body tissue, and other specimens na needed, of course. And of course, yung examiner, yung forensic chemist, would also conduct drug test on body fluids of suspected individuals in order to determine the presence or yung level or content ng mga suspected dangerous drug components, pati yung mga metabolites. So how about yung mga paraphernalia na nakakalap ng law enforcement? Are they being tested also during drug identification? Well, yes. they are also submitted as specimen. Yan. Kung saan kukunan ng mga portions or they will just scrape it out. Yan. For example, mga foils, mga tutors, mga joints nila, mga boga nila to determine if there is or are presence ng mga dangerous drugs on those paraphernalias. So, examination ng mga dangerous drugs or yung forensic drug analysis. Okay? There are two methods of examination. We have the qualitative examination and the quantitative examination. Okay? So, when we say quantitative, if, of course, yan yung frequency or number of specimen or samples na pwedeng makuha. Okay? On the basis niyan, pwede tayong makakakuha ng mga results. Kung qualitative, of course, pag scarce yung specimen or yung samples natin, then we would conduct examination sa qualitative examination na kung saan sa iisang sample lang tayo magbabase. So, here are the steps that are common or pareho sa mga qualitative examinations at quantitative examinations. First, of course, the examiner needs to select a method to be used. Okay? Of course, depende na rin sa kung ano yung suspected dangerous drug. They would also depend kung anong method or test ang gagamitin. Of course, there will be physical tests, especially for those specimen na considered paraphernalias. Sampling and sample preparation, of course, yan sila. It is needed na before the conduct of the examination, those samples are identified, recorded, and properly labeled and prepared for instrumentation. Ayan. So, napakaraming ginagamit na mga equipment dyan, of course. Ayan. And we also have the chemical test with the use of primarily color tests and other reactive chemical tests to determine if there are changes or matches, especially with those specimen na urine and blood. Of course, the second part is of course yung confirmatory examination, which will be explained further in the next following moments. And of course, calculation and interpretation of dates. Of course, parte rin yan sa sa forensic chemistry. Trabaho ng forensic chemist is to trace the dates. Yan, yung possible dates kung kailan last gumamit ang user by virtue of the sample at kung gaano kadalas na ba ginagamit ng user through the sample, of course, yung paggamit ng dangerous drug. And of course, just like everything else, you need to draw conclusions via a written report. Which of course, yung written report na yan, in the jargon or language ng chemist, na ipipresenta niya sa korte. Of course, it will be part of a documentary evidence in favor of the prosecution. So of course, in the forensic drug analysis, meron yung two phases of examination. Okay? Bawat examination, dalawang phases talaga yan. We have the screening or preliminary test or yung initial test. So, in forensic drug analysis dito sa ating bansa and for similar countries, it is basically easier and much more efficient to conduct a color test. So, ano yung ginagawa sa color test? Of course, with the use of colors originating from various sources or chemicals. Okay? Dito sa screening test, this is non-specific and preliminary in nature. Okay? Ang purpose ng preliminary test is to reduce the family or group of drug to a small and manageable number. Ibig sabihin, For example, if they presumed na ang user is using hallucinogens, then itong screening test would be able to identify kung hallucinogen ba talaga ang content ng specimen or not. Kung nag-positive na hallucinogen nga ang content, then that is the time they would conduct another test. Yan. Still similar sa color test to identify kung anong specific hallucinogen yung present sa specimen. So, meron yung tinatawag na screening tests. Okay? Still part of the first phase. Na kung saan series of color tests ang gagawin. And of course, kung color test, meron talagang color characteristics for each family or group ng drugs. So, anong ginagamit niya ng mga chemicals? We call them reagents. Okay? Itong mga reagents, of course, specific to sila. They will change into a color depende sa kung ano yung present na illegal drug component sa isang specimen. Ayan. So, screening test is quite simple to perform and of course, it is much more efficient and much more mobile. Ibig sabihin, pwedeng mag-screening test without much use of instruments or yung mga equipment. You only need the reagent, of course, spot plates, and a specimen or specimen. So, with regards to color reactions, yan, meron tayong mga samples dyan. Okay? For common dangerous drugs, such as cannabis or yung weed, kumbaga. We have different names of tests, such as Duquesnoy-Levin, fast blue bee salt. Okay? Yan silang common na ginagamit ng mga forensic chemists with that chemicals or yung mga reagents na yan. Pag ang specimen is presumed or suspected na merong cannabis, of course, once you put a content ng reagent for Duquesnoy-Levin test, magkakaroon ng positive confirmation na may cannabis content ang specimen pag yung specimen would turn into violet. Ayan. Kung fast blue bee salt, of course, kung may presence ng cannabis, it would turn the specimen into purple red. Kung ang suspected presence of cocaine ang hinahanap, of course, some of them would use yung mga alkaloid or alkaloid-based test. Like for example, yung CT or cobalt thiocyanate test. Na kung saan they would pour it into, of course, yung urine nasa spot plate. They would use a reagent, specified reagent under the CT test. And if to change yung color into a blue or deep blue color, yan, then it would confirm the presence of cocaine preliminarily. Yan. Kung sa Scott test naman or modified C test, there will be 3 different reagents. Diba? Sinabi ko, series of color tests yan sa phase 1. So, on the first reagent, kung mag-blue yan, of course, positive. Kung mag-pink na naman sa second reagent, it would make positive result. And to confirm it, pero hindi pa siya part ng confirmatory test ha, kung sa CT test or modified CT test, sa third reagent, nag-blue ulit, then of course, may presence ng cocaine. If we use Wagner test with Wagner's reagent, yan, if we want to confirm the presence of cocaine, then yung specimen, it must turn into brown o yung brownish color. Na, if we want to confirm presence of, sabihin natin, presence of diazepam, we would use the Zimmerman test. Kung saan, through the Zimmerman test and using the Zimmerman reagent or yung reagent na ginagamit sa test, we could confirm if there is diazepam content on the specimen kung mag-change ang color niya into reddish purple or yung pink. Okay? Ayan. Kung hydrochloric test naman at goal natin malaman kung may content ng diazepam, it will turn the specimen color into yellow. Yan. O yung bright yellow or yellow-orange kung Vitali Morin test. If you want to know the presence of opium on the specimen, if we would use the Marquis test, yan, of course, with the use of the Marquis reagent, it would turn the color of the specimen from plain to violet. Ferric sulfate, basically iron ito. Iron sulfate. If we want to know the presence of opium with the use of a ferric sulfate reagent, ang mangyayari sa specimen is it will turn into brownish purple. Kanang murag yuta. Okay, or mud-like brown. When we use nitric acid to determine the presence of opium in a specimen, sabihin natin ihi. Of course, it would turn the color of the specimen from orange to red, then to yellow. Okay? If there is a presence of opium. Kung morphine naman ang itetest natin, of course, we would use Marquis test. Of course, using Marquis reagent. Same with opium kasi ang morphine is a derivative of opium. It will turn the specimen color into violet. But mostly, it will turn into deep reddish purple. Kana, mag scarlet purple. If we want to know the presence of codeine using MEC or MECI test with MECI's reagent, of course, it will turn the specimen color from blue to green. Kung codeine naman with the use of nitric acid test, of course, by pouring contents of nitric acid, ang mangyayari sa specimen, it will turn it from orange to yellow color. Okay? Kung heroin naman ang gusto nating ma-determine, if we use the MECI test or MEC test from blue to green, pag nitric acid naman ang gamitin, of course, yellow to green. That is if we want to identify heroin presence in the specimen. For those sedatives, such as barbiturates, yan. Ang common na test na ginagamit niyan or color test is yung Dill-Company test. Kung saan, yung specimen, if it turns into a reddish-purple color after a few minutes or even seconds, then there's really positive presence for barbiturates on the specimen. Kung shabu naman na test, of course, they will be using Simon's test, of course, with Simon's reagent. It is a chemical founded in order to determine the presence of amphetamines on samples such as blood and most commonly urine. Yan. Ito lahat sila urine to na color tests. Kung saan, if we use the Simon's reagent, it will turn the specimen to blue, which of course would confirm the presence of methamphetamine hydrochloride. Kung Marquis test naman ang gagamitin, of course, with the use of a Marquis reagent, a different reagent from Simon reagent, of course, it would turn the specimen into brown, of course, from orange to brown yan, which would confirm the presence of methamphetamine hydrochloride. Like for example, yung kaso ng isang babae sa Cebu who died of ecstasy overdose from a rave party. Yan. So, paano nalaman na ecstasy? Ang ginamit ng mga forensic chemist during the color test initially, of course, they used a Simon test. Buti na lang, nag-appear na blue. Yan. It was technically parang sky blue. But it really confirmed from that na may presence talaga ng ecstasy sa bloodstream or even sa body na mismo ng victim. Ito naman, tong iba like methacalcone and phenycylidine or phenycyclidine, yan, ito sila. These are much more specific tests for LSD and mescaline content. So of course, if you want to know if there is a presence of LSD in the sample or the specimen, they would use Ehrlich reagent, of course, Ehrlich test, which would convey a violet color change if positively may LSD content. Kung may mescaline naman, this is another type of dangerous drug. Of course, kung gagamit ka ng Lieberman's test with Lieberman's reagent, it will turn the specimen into black. Okay? Yung ihi magiging black. O yung ihi na specimen. When you use Marquis test with Marquis reagent, if you want to positively identify presence of mescaline, ang mangyayari is that it will turn the specimen into orange. Yan. So those are just some. Actually, most of the color test na yan for yung mga common na abused dangerous drugs dito sa Pilipinas. Those are the equivalent results for color testing. Okay? Still part of the initial or yung screening test na phase. But just to take a note, hindi ibig sabihin na pag nag-change ng color sa kung ano yung presumption niyan during the screening test, if it has created a positive match or may positive result from the color test, it does not mean na, oh, nag-match. Conclusive. No, not yet. Hindi pa. 'Di ba may dalawang phases tayo? We still need to conduct confirmatory tests. It must be noted na yung positive results sa screening test, again, they are not conclusive. Kasi meron pang mga substances that may give the same position or yung positive color reaction from the same reagent. Yan. So confirmatory tests, of course, would be performed by a forensic chemist. And of course, ang purpose nitong screening test na ito is of course to establish the presence na, oh, may content ng ganyang classification ng dangerous drug or ng ganyang chemical. It would only yield presumptive positive results during screening test. And of course, itong mga resulta na ito would be tentative. And it would still be needed for the specimen na masubject to a confirmatory test. So, in the confirmatory test, of course, ito yung magko-confirm na. Yan. So, this is employed to confirm the results from the screening or preliminary test. Okay? It would confirm these results coming from the previous phase, yung screening test. Na kung saan dito na naman, aside from retesting it, meron ng mga analytical procedures aside from color testing. Yan. So, dito, mas increased yung techniques na ginagamit and of course, yung chemical principles in relation to the confirmatory test are different from the initial test or initial phase ng drug analysis. Okay? So, dito, heavily reliant sila sa use ng much more advanced, much more complicated instrumentation or paggamit ng mga equipment. Yan. For example, they would do chromatography, either high pressure, gas chromatography, or thin layer chromatography ang gagawin. Sir, ano ba yung chromatography? Okay, it's already in there. Process of separating mixture. Yan. For example, of course, as we all know, ang barbiturates, meron yung iba't ibang mga components, iba't ibang mga ingredients. So in chromatography, it would separate those components and identify those components. Yan. And of course, in modern equipment for chromatography, automatic na yan na ita-translate kung ano ba yung contents na yan, ano yung mga raw materials na yan, and they would be able to pinpoint kung ano ang possible na mga illegal drugs or substances ang pwedeng nasa mga specimen. Okay, so there are different techniques, of course, utilizing different instruments or equipment. So, what is gas chromatography? Yan yung pinaka-common dito. Okay? So, basically, dito sa gas chromatography, it would separate the contents from the specimen based on the migration rates ng mga sample components. Of course, they would either use spectroscopy on that, confirmatory method whereby light is used to identify the sample specimen in relation to the changes in color. They might use UV spectroscopy to screen dangerous drugs, especially sa urine. If there are changes sa color. They could also use the Fourier transform infrared spectroscopy or yung FTIR or FTIR to identify, 'di ba, pag spectroscopy, sineseparate yung mga raw components ng bawat chemical. So, they would be able to identify those pure organic substances or raw materials or raw ingredients of those drugs. But if yung tinetest is presumption of organic drugs or organic substances or explosive ingredients, yung resulta niyan or yung method sa FTIR, they could really pinpoint the exact number with regards to the content of these substances. Kumbaga parang kinukunan ng fingerprint yung bawat component, bawat specimen, bawat substance. So, examination of urine specimen. Okay? The rate of excretion from the body depends on the drug's solubility in body fat. Okay? So, merong mga drugs na water soluble. Ibig sabihin, pwede silang lumabas sa system ng katawan quickly than others. Water soluble, yung madaling madilute through water. For example, yung parang mga powdered components, mga powdered na drugs, yan. Water soluble yan sila. Pag fat soluble drugs naman, like marijuana, ang direction ng kanilang pagpasok sa katawan is much more different than those ingested, commonly mga water soluble drugs. So for example, like marijuana, it will take several weeks or months before ma-completely wala sa body system yung contents ng marijuana. Sa cocaine, it is more or less a week or sabihin natin mga 3 to 5 days or 3 to 6 days. Yan. So drug tests must be conducted to quickly apprehend the suspected individual. Kaya nga ang mga forensic chemists, they have equipment that would really yield and create results as quickly as possible. And of course, after the last test, of course, 'di ba, may screening and then merong confirmatory test. There's still a need for the final phase, of course, part pa rin ng second phase, which is validity test. Yan. So, it will determine if it is valid yung resulta. For validity test sa urine specimen, it is conducted to determine the integrity of the samples if it is really urine or not. Okay? So, for urine samples, ginagawa din ito in the start to determine if galing ba talaga sa tao tong ihi na to, gawa lang ba ito ng Illuminati, or ihi to ng ibang animal. Okay? To validate if the specimen bound for examination is really from the suspected individual or from a human being. Same goes with validity test for blood. Malay mo yung specimen na present is not really of human origin. So why there is a reason to conduct validity tests, especially sa drug analysis. So, what if during the drug test, sabihin natin nag-drug test ang isang organization, walang nag-observe sa proseso ng pagbigay o pag-collect ng specimen. Walang standard. Of course, kailangan ng validity test. Malay mo, hinaluan ng iba pang mga chemicals that would mimic or be similar with urine. Or when there is suspicion na yung urine is tampered. Diba? Hinaluan ng ibang ihi. Diba? Nag-mix pag-ihi. Diba? So, there is a need for a validity test for that. So, merong different types of tampered urine specimen. Okay? Different types. Please take note of this. Yan, kasi ito ay magagamit yun rin na terms, especially when you are already practicing this. Okay? First, we have adulterated urine specimen. So, itong adulterated, of course, dinaya. Ang contents ng specimen na ito does not contain a normal constituent. Ibig sabihin, may mga substances na hinalo which is not normal or not in regular mixture with irregular urine. Yung sinabi nilang hinalo, yan, dinaya. When we say diluted urine specimen, this refers to urine specimen na less than normal physiological constituents. Okay, sa adulterated, contains a substance that is not normal, ang constituent, or containing an endogenous substance, or may ibang concentration. Kung diluted naman, specimen na less than normal physiological constituents. While sa substituted naman, sinwitch yung samples na binigay. Yung sample ni Mr. A napunta kay Mr. C. There's a replacement of the original sample. Okay, so those are the different types of tampered urine specimen. So, for those of you who wanted to adulterate your urine samples, may mga guides dito. Yan. First, addition of salt. Malay mo during the urine test o yung drug test by virtue of urine samples. Malay mo nung umiihi, nilagyan ng asin. Rock salt ba na or yung mas pino na fine grain na salt. It would adulterate the contents of it. O dinagdagan ng juice, sabihin natin mango ang flavor, 'di ba? Yellowish, 'di ba? Or dinagdagan ng pineapple juice yung ihi. Pwede, pero again, it would consider the specimen as adulterated. Or nilagyan ng detergent. Yan. Medyo maglalabo yung specimen, but again, it would be determined. Still, adulteration. Or nilagyan ng bleach. or other oxidizers or nilagyan ng iba pang illicit drugs. So those are methods to adulterate urine during drug testing, 'di ba? I'm not telling you to do it. Nako, malalaman pa rin 'yan. Whether you cheat or not, it would still be identified through forensic chemistry. How about substituting a urine sample? Ayan. That's why during drug testing, it is not prescribed under PDEA and even the PNP na magda-drug testing sa CR ng sabay or magda-drug testing sa isang CR pero may dalawang nagkasabay. It is always individual testing. Hindi pwedeng magsabay sa isang CR kahit magkapareho kayo ng gender. 'Di ba? Isa-isa ra jud na kada sulod sa CR. Because you might substitute it from your friends or sino mang kakuntsabo. 'Di ba? Magkakaroon ng substituted specimen. 'Di ba? Or sabihin natin na yung isa ah, nakipagsabot, 'di ba? Magsabot na sila na oh pare imuha na lang ning specimen na ako kay limpyo ni. And then yung gusto magpa-replace is user, 'di ba? Substituted. How about dilution ng isang urine specimen? There are two kinds of dilution, internal and external dilution. For example, sa internal dilution, of course, para malinis yung kidneys, malinis yung urinary tract, of course, iinom ng maraming tubig before collection. Or magtiti, di ba? Hindi nagtiti pero magtiti yan, di ba? Something weird. And of course, the external dilution. For example, nakakuha na siya ng sample ng urine niya, he would add water and dilute it, di ba? He would mix water that he added after the urination. Oh, 'di ba? External dilution, 'di ba? Kung sa internal dilution, nililinis mismo at hinahalo mismo sa loob ng katawan. Sa external dilution, you're diluting it or minimix mo after urination. Sa labas na ng katawan. Okay? So those are the ways to dilute a urine specimen. So here are the parameters for validity tests. Okay? For initial validity tests, dito, ang tinitingnan na parameters ng isang forensic chemist are the following. We have physical characteristics, of course, yung amoy ng sample, yung color ng sample, and all other physical characteristics. Kung nagbubula ba, may mga visible contents ba. Next is volume. Kaya standard yung sinasabi sa drug testing na up until to a certain point sa bottle, yung dapat mabigay na sample. Too little is not accepted. Too much, pwede, obviously. The more content for sampling, the better. Temperature, of course, kino-consider din ang temperature sa testing area. If the temperature is humid, mainit ba, or the temperature is fairly cold. Next, pH level ng sample during validity test. When we say pH sample, it is the level of acidity. Diba? For example, ihi, it's acidic. Pero may mga ihi na highly acidic due to a condition ng tao or due to the past intake ng tao na nagbigay ng specimen. Malay mo, meron siyang in-intake na highly acidic product. Of course, specific gravity that regards to the characteristics of the specimen sa liquid. If there are presence of nitrates or creatinine level, madedetermine sa ihi. Kung may mataas bang creatinine or normal lang ba or kulang sa creatinine. Yan. And of course, if there is or are possible presence of oxidizing agents sa specimen. Next is confirmatory validity test. Ayan. So dito naman sa confirmatory validity test, diyan mga physical characteristics pa rin, volume, temperature, still the same. Still the same with the previous one, yung initial validity test. They're just the same. Pero ang gagawin sa confirmatory validity test is titingnan ba nila kung may severe or slight changes or wala bang changes with regards to these following checklists or with these following na mga points. So I would skip to the criteria in determining tampered urine specimen. Ayan, for adulterated, diluted, and substituted. Ayan, with regards to their pH level and specific gravity yan. Yan yung common. Okay? I will just let you view it. So next, when do we consider a urine specimen as an invalid specimen? Yan. So merong circumstances dyan ha. Pinapakita ko na sa inyo. When do we consider a urine specimen as invalid? Okay, first, if it is either adulterated, substituted, or diluted. Okay, either of the three. Or when the specimen is improperly collected, handled, and stored. Malay nimo ang specimen katong iyahang bote, 'di ba? Naibangag. Of course, so ang nangyari, improper storage. Kanya siguro ang specimen siguro improperly handled na maliog label para kay Mr. A pero nabutang Mr. C or improperly documented. Mali yung purpose or mali yung requesting authority. Ayan. Mga technicalities ang tawag niyan. Either of those, it would make the specimen invalid. Oh, so ayun. That would be the end of my discussion. With regards to the color tests, let me just go back to it. Let me just show you again yung sa mga color test. Ayan. Ayan. So, for those of you who might not understand, I might show you a sort of picture of it, 'di ba? Based from your syllabus or syllabus. From your sim pala. Sorry. So, ayan. Yan yung parang magiging um, color reaction. Yan. Either for blood or urine tests. Yan. So, yan yung possible na makikita nyo. 'Di ba? Makikita nyo may changes in color. But there are also differences with regards to yung mga kumpul-kumpul ng colors. 'Di ba? Kanang marag unod-unod niya. Kita na ninyo, there are differences which will still confirm the same thing. Yan. With either Marquis reagent, Mech reagent or Mecki reagent, Simon's reagent used in Simon's test, o yung Lieberman's reagent. Yan. So for those who might not understand ano yung mga chromatography tests, ayan, I will show you again. Photos, yan. Yan yung ginagamit na mobile gas chromatography machine. Yan. Meron yan sa crime lab, meron yan sa NBI at PIDEA, wala yan sa UM. Ito din, meron ding spectrophotometry. Okay? It is the study of the absorption of light by chemical substances. Okay? Malay nyo, maintindihan nyo yan if it is being used with color components. Okay? Wavelengths ang minimeasure niyan at yung differences or changes in wavelengths, pati yung detection from the light source, yan yung nagde-determine ng chemical substances present in the specimen. So, yung color niyan, yung mga findings niyan, electronically will be converted into a numerical result, which of course, may basis din yan sa content level per numerical result. Yan yung spectrophotometry. Of course, with the use of a spectrophotometer. Okay, so I think that is all for my discussion today. I hope you have learned a lot, and I hope that those learnings will be retained in preparation for your exam. So that will be all for me. Thank you. Thank you for listening. And by the time you have seen this, this has already been posted in your LMS dashboard. Okay, so once again, thank you. God bless. Stay safe. And that is all.